Okay, let's unpack this. What's in a name?
Seems simple, right?
Yeah, it really does. But what about the name of a body of water in the Middle East? One that sparked, well, decades of debate.
Ah, yes, that one.
Today, you've brought us a couple of really fascinating sources. We're going to do a deep dive into the history, the geopolitics, all surrounding the naming of the Persian Gulf.
That's right. One source really gets into the historical usage, digs deep there.
And the other looks more towards the future, focusing on Iran-Saudi Arabia relations.
Exactly. How that relationship shapes the whole region.
And you mentioned, wanting to understand how the past shapes what's happening now.
Yeah, and get a handle on all the different perspectives without just being, overwhelmed by it all.
Well, that's exactly what we're aiming for today. We want to clearly explore the historical claims, understand why this name is so significant, and touch on what it means for the region's future stability, all hopefully in a way that's easy to follow.
It's great you're digging into this because this seemingly simple naming thing, it just opens up a window into so much more, doesn't it?
It really does. So where do we start? The historical claims.
Let's do it. That first source, a study of the history of the name of the Persian Gulf, it really goes there, points out that even way back, Sumerian times, Assyrian times,
Ancient history.
right,
Yeah.
they had references to this water as Narmaratu.
Ramaratu, okay.
So even before, a clear Persian identity as we think of it now, the waterway had a specific name, shows its long-standing importance.
Okay.
But here's the core argument from that study. It claims that continuously, from the time Iranians were a major presence there,
Yeah.
it has always been called the Persian Gulf.
Always. That's a strong claim. What's the evidence they use?
Well, the study points to ancient writings, history books, maps,
Yeah.
basically arguing for this unbroken historical thread, this constant Iranian connection to the area leading to that name sticking.
Right. An enduring usage. But then what about the alternative names we hear? The study calls them forged names, used more recently by some neighboring Arab countries.
Yeah, it does use that term.
Why the change, according to this source?
The study suggests it links this recent shift towards other names to economic interests. Specifically, a desire by some Arab nations, maybe, to associate themselves more directly with the immense oil wealth concentrated right there.
Oil. Makes sense. Does it mention the West at all?
It touches on it, hints that maybe Western powers focusing on oil access and influence in this very strategic region might have inadvertently played a part, perhaps by not consistently sticking to one name. This source calls it exploitative activities.
Interesting. So it suggests it's not just about history for some, but potentially tied to who benefits from the oil. Okay. Let's pivot a bit.
Okay.
Our second source, analyzing the future of the Persian Gulf, this one looks at the geopolitics. It states the Gulf has historically been a major geopolitical hotspot, especially concerning Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely.
Why are those two countries seen as so central?
Well, if you look at the bigger picture, this study identifies Iran and Saudi Arabia as really the two key players, the ones with the most influence over what happens in the Persian Gulf region.
And their relationship hasn't always been smooth, right?
Definitely not. The study highlights that past tensions between them have had, significant negative ripple effects across the whole area. Instability, uncertainty.
But this second source, it sounds a bit more hopeful. It notes signs that maybe these tensions are easing now.
It does strike a slightly more optimistic tone there. It suggests that if this trend of easing tensions continues, we could see real improvements.
Like what kind of improvements?
The study points to potential positive changes in the region's economies, overall security, even the military postures of the countries involved. Less friction could really open doors for more stability, maybe more cooperation.
That would be significant. Now, this source also digs into the key factors that experts think will shape the future geopolitics there. And it's quite a list.
It is, yeah, based on expert interviews.
Can you maybe highlight a few of the most important ones for us?
Sure. Well, several really influential elements come up. Things like the involvement of what they call transregional partners. Think major global powers like the U.S., Russia, maybe others.
Outside players.
Right. And related to that, the influence of authoritative powers, basically the impact these big players have. Then there are economic factors like setting up shared markets,
Okay.
cooperation on maritime issues, very important in the Gulf, and of course the oil and gas trade.
Still central.
Always. But then there are also security aspects like arms races, potential conflicts within the region, and other things too, like how currencies are managed, the transit of goods through the area, and interestingly, the increasing involvement of China.
China's ingress, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what becomes really clear is that the future there isn't just about Iran and Saudi Arabia talking to each other. It's heavily influenced by external players, global economics. It's a really interconnected geopolitical stage.
Okay, so we've got the history, the current geopolitical scene. Now let's switch gears again. International law.
Right, the legal angle.
Our third source. Analyzing the Persian Gulf naming dispute from international law perspective. How does international law approach something like naming a sea?
Well, according to this article, it looks at mainly four things. First, historical reasoning.
Yeah.
They use something called the critical date theory.
Critical date theory? What's that?
Think of it like taking a historical snapshot.
Yeah.
They pick a specific point in time and see what the common prevailing name was then.
Okay, a benchmark. What else?
They also look at judicial precedent, previous court cases, like one mentioned here, Macedonia v. Greece. Then, the established practices of international organizations, like the UN. And finally, any relevant legal agreements or treaties between countries.
And this article identifies a critical date.
It does. It points to 1957 and the broader 1960s as this key period.
Why then? What's special about the late 50s, early 60s?
The argument is that if you look at historical documents, maps, official records from before 1957 and throughout the 60s, they overwhelmingly support the use of the name Persian Gulf. That was the established name at that critical time.
Okay. And what about those international organizations you mentioned, the UN, others?
Yeah, the article points out that major bodies like the United Nations and also the International Hydrographic Organization, the IHO, which deals with mapping seas, they generally use Persian Gulf in their official documents and charts.
So their practice leans towards that name.
That's the argument presented, yes.
And legal agreements, treaties.
The article highlights several, like the 2003 UNESCO Convention on Intangible Cultural Heritage, the big 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, various bilateral agreements. The interpretation, it suggests, tends to favor recognizing the historically established name.
Which, in this case, they argue is Persian Gulf.
Correct.
You mentioned a court case earlier, Macedonia v. Greece. How does that fit in?
Oh, that's interesting. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ in that case, upheld a legal principle. It's Latin. Prior, in tempo potior, endure.
Okay. What does that mean in plain English?
Basically, first in time, stronger in right.
Ah. So what came first has a stronger claim.
Exactly. It means historical precedents carry significant weight when you have conflicting claims. So this precedent is used to further bolster the legal argument for Persian Gulf, based on its long history of use.
That makes sense. The longer a name's been used, the stronger its legal standing, sort of. Okay. Now let's look at some more recent political stuff around this name.
Right, the contemporary actions.
Our fourth source is a Newsweek report. It's dated May 2025, so it's discussing a hypothetical.
Right, something that didn't actually happen in our timeline.
Yeah, it's about Iran reacting to a hypothetical event where Trump renames the Persian Gulf. Even though it's hypothetical, what does the scenario tell us?
It really just underscores how incredibly sensitive this naming issue is. Deeply felt. Even the suggestion that a major global figure might unilaterally change the name provokes a strong hypothetical reaction. It highlights the profound cultural, national significance Iran attaches to that specific name, Persian Gulf.
And we do have a real-world parallel, don't we? Trump's earlier attempt to rename the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, the Gulf of America, yeah. And the pushback he got, especially from the Associated Press.
What does that real example show us about these kinds of naming politics?
What really highlights the political motivations that can sometimes drive these attempts to change long-established geographic names. And it also shows how such efforts can face resistance, from established institutions, from the media, especially when history and international norms seem to favor the existing name. The AP just kept using Gulf of Mexico, right? Shows the power of convention.
It does. Okay, next source. This one's official. A statement from the U.S. Board on Geographic Names, the BGN. What's the official U.S. policy on Persian Gulf?
The BGN policy is actually quite clear on this. For features on the high seas, like the Gulf, that have a single, widely accepted English name.
Which they call a conventional name.
Exactly. A conventional name is one in widespread current English usage. And for the U.S. government, that name is the standard for all official publications.
And that name is?
The BGN-approved name is Persian Gulf.
Okay, so officially Persian Gulf.
Yes. Now, they do add a nuance. They acknowledge that the term Arabian Gulf is acceptable sometimes.
When?
Specifically in informal communications with Arabic-speaking military and government partners in the region, sort of a practical allowance.
But for the record?
For the record, official U.S. government documents, press comments, maps, reports, they must use Persian Gulf. That's the policy.
So the official U.S. stance leans heavily on the historical name while allowing some flexibility informally.
That sums it up well, yeah.
All right. Finally, let's dive into our last source. This one's a bit different, an online discussion from Reddit. This gives us a glimpse into, well, public opinion, right?
Yeah, raw opinions, and often very strong ones.
I bet. What were some of the main arguments or feelings people expressed there?
Oh, it was a real spectrum. Lots of strong feelings, often tied very closely to national identity. One user, Shiru, really emphasized the long history going back to antiquity, mentioned the shift by Saudi Arabia happening more recently, like in the 1970s. And they even provided the name in Persian, ancient Greek, Latin, medieval Arabic. Also pointed out the UN and IH usage. Very historically focused.
Anyone else trace the alternative name's origin?
Another user suggested Egypt under Gamal Abdel Nasser might have been where Arabian Gulf really started gaining traction politically. And someone else, Azabard 101, even claimed that early Islamic texts used Persian Gulf.
Wow. So a real sense of historical ownership coming through from some users.
Definitely. Especially, it seems, from users identifying as Iranian.
Were there other viewpoints? Maybe suggestions for compromise?
Yeah, plenty of opinions arguing for the correctness of one name or the other,
right.
Often very nationalistic. But some did propose alternatives, maybe to bridge the gap. Names like Perso-Arab Gulf.
Quick.
Or Basra Gulf, which apparently is used sometimes in Turkish.
Interesting. Any other standout comments?
One user, Still Big Baller, made a comparison to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, talking about the importance of historical integrity and linking the name Persian Gulf directly to Iranian national identity, from Persian Gulf to Caspian Sea, they said.
Powerful imagery.
And interestingly, there was an Arab user, their orange chump, who just stated, quite frankly, let's face it, it is the Persian Gulf, acknowledging the historical basis even from that perspective.
That is interesting. So quite the range, defending history, acknowledging politics.
Exactly. It really highlights, like with so many of these issues, there isn't one single universally agreed story, is there?
Not at all.
And the Reddit thread also brought up something fascinating, the idea that Google Maps might actually show different names depending on where the user is accessing it from.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, reflecting the ongoing debate and catering to different viewpoints, perhaps. Some users dismissed the whole thing as just, nationalistic posturing. Others clearly felt it was deeply significant, fundamental to their identity and history.
So let's try to bring it all together then.
Okay.
We've seen the name Persian Gulf has these really deep historical roots, supported by ancient records, the general practice of international bodies.
Right. And the more recent disputes seem very tangled up with geopolitics, national identities, maybe those economic interests we talked about.
Yeah. And international law, while complex, tends to lean towards recognizing established historical names based on that critical date idea and precedent.
But political motivations clearly can and do lead to alternative names being pushed and used regardless of the historical or legal arguments.
And even just looking at that online chat shows how deeply people feel about it, clashing beliefs, but also maybe some tentative ideas for common ground sometimes.
And thinking back to what you were curious about at the start, understanding the history behind current events, the different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Hopefully, exploring all this, the history, the geopolitics, the law, even those raw online opinions, has given you and everyone listening a much richer picture than just a simple definition or a headline.
Absolutely. It's clear this debate isn't just about words on a map.
Not at all. It reflects deeper power dynamics, how nations see themselves, their history, their place in a really complex part of the world.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? How something seemingly straightforward as a name can be so loaded with history, politics, identity. Okay, here's a final thought then for you to mull over.
Right.
Given everything we've discussed, the long history of Persian Gulf, the official stance of bodies like the USBGN, What if a major global power did officially and consistently start using an alternative name? What long-term impact do you think that could have on international norms, on how historical names are perceived and used globally in the future? Could a move like that be seen as a sign of shifting power dynamics, actually changing the maps we use to understand the world?